the fields that you would expect to have taken over the traumatic brain injury crisis really hasn't succeeded. It's just sad when you go to neurologists and you see the people you're supposed to see to get fixed when something bad happens, and then they basically don't have hope for you because they don't really know. But even some of the stuff that like the Carrick Institute does, or Cognitive FX, or some of the plasticity centers, like that could all be considered, like, I think, alternative medicine. And I hate calling it that because that has such a negative connotation. It's just sad when you go to neurologists and you see the people you're supposed to see to get fixed when something bad happens, and then they basically don't have hope for you because they don't really know.
Brittany and I visited with 24 different doctors that all said, you can't heal, nothing's going to change, take these pain medications, until we finally found Dr. Zielinski to help her with vision in Chicago, and then plasticity to help with vestibular in Florida, and then finally Cognitive FX to help with the neurovascular coupling dysfunction and the blood flow to the brain. And it was so irritating the entire time. Every time we found a new treatment that was effective, it just made me more irritated because our neurologists and other doctors that we had worked with said that there was no help. Don't even try. And now every time we prove them wrong, it's like a little piece of righteous indignation just like flares up, because I know that they're so wrong. And Dr. Antonucci actually said it really well. We were chatting when he was treating Brittany about the failure of the medical community. And if anyone's watching this, don't attribute, my 2-year-old memory to something he actually said. But this is where I got the idea. So I'm sure it's evolved since then. But he said that the standard traditional medical community is really great when it comes to trauma and keeping someone from dying. After that, with brain injuries, and these weren't his words, these are totally my words now, they're worthless. Totally worthless. And that doesn't mean we didn't pay him a lot of money. It just means they didn't help my wife heal. So I would love to hear your perspective on that, John, and not that we just want to bag on the medical community, but the alternative treatments that we're experiencing now that are actually working, they shouldn't be labeled as alternative treatments. That they really should just be labeled as standard concussion protocols.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'll start off by premising, like, I'm in medical school right now. So, I'm right now I'm at the University of Kentucky. I'm getting my MD and PhD from here, and I'm in my first year. So I'll have, 7 more years of education before residency and going into, I'm interested in either neurology or neurosurgery right now. And so I am totally on board with the medical like the traditional medical philosophy. And one of the reasons why I think that, the MDs who we hold so much high esteem for are failing is because no one really in the field is having success at this. And so when they see, in my opinion, when they see outside fields kind of make these breakthroughs, there's a little bit of pushback from their community saying, well, it could possibly be the pushback is, well, you're not MDs, you didn't go to medical school, or, you didn't get all of this training to appropriately address this. And I can resonate with that a little bit. However, at the end of the day, we come into this field to help our patients to the best of our ability. And if something works, that should be the outcome that we, measure it from. If a patient's quality of life substantially improves through, what we would do with Dr. Clark with putting on colored glasses to help alleviate a little bit of photosensitivity, and it worked for the patient and the patient felt better by putting them on, even if that's a subjective outcome measure, the patient feels better. And so then once the patient feels better, you can then start to dive in on things that may be bubbling up because of, now that symptom's alleviated. Now there's other more serious symptoms that you can alleviate because that one has been taken care of. We've had MDs refer who weren't able to as effectively treat some traumatic brain injury patients get referred to Dr. Clark, who is a PhD. And that was eye opening to me because, when I was an undergrad ways back in pre med, my limited understanding was that MDs were the only people who treated patients. And seeing a PhD, a scientist, act as a physician extender was really fascinating to me. And that's where I think one of Dr. Clark's strengths comes from is his background in athletic training, as well as his depth, his immense knowledge of neurophysiology with his PhD. And so he was able to do things that are outside the standard of care that a lot of MDs abide by. And so that's where I kind of think, the medical system in a way fails patients. It's sad, traumatic brain injury patients. And it's sad because, one of the statistics that I've read is that from our patient population with Dr. Clark, I believe it was either 60 or 80% of the patients we saw had visual symptoms, something relating to their vision, whether it was, photosensitivity or blurry vision or, difficulty in accommodation. So transitioning their focus from a near object to a far object, or whether it was, their eyes are over converging or under converging based on the traumatic brain or, caused from the traumatic brain injury. And all those things most of the time led to a headache. And headaches are, one of the most I don't want to say misunderstood, one of the least understood neurological phenomenons, yet are so common.
Mm-hmm. Especially with brain injuries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's more of how can we alleviate, in my opinion, it's more of how can we alleviate the symptoms that patients are experiencing so that we can then go into the underlying causes of what is physiologically going wrong that are causing these symptoms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Well, and that was such a refreshing perspective to receive from Dr. Antonucci at Plasticity, and then from Dr. Spong and Allen at Cognitive FX. There was so much more context that they had to understand my wife's injury, and I think to understand all of their patients, that like for instance, maybe the MDs that we were seeing here in like before traveling around and finding these better doctors, maybe they only had this much context, right? They only knew what they knew. And then we go see, Dr. Fong and, Dr. Lowen here at Cognitive FX, and it just blows up. They knew so much more that could make a difference, right? Not necessarily that all of it did, but they had paid the price and spent the time to really understand brain injuries in a way that most even brain injury specialists that we saw never seemed to get to. So yeah, that what you said really resonates with me on that, because like that was one of the first realizations while I was talking with these better doctors, where I started to have hope in recovery for my wife again, that it was years of just the same old negative reinforcement, and while there's negative reinforcement happening, verbally from these doctors, there's learned dysfunction happening for my wife at the exact same time, and I could see it. And then when we finally had doctors that gave us that hope, that said, no, you actually can heal, and we're going to work on your vestibular system, we're going to work on your blood flow, we're going to work on your vision, and everything else, it was almost like the weight was just lifted off my shoulders, right? Like, oh, there is hope. I don't have to just keep pumping pain pills.
Exactly. Like there's at least, a strategy or some areas that we can start with to see where we're going to go next. And, another thing that, because I am in the field of, because I am going to be an MD, I really don't want to bag on the field. And another possible explanation to that could be the healthcare system in general, where it's, like you kind of going off what you said, it's the brain injury specialists, some of the neurologists that you would go see only knew what they knew. And they didn't have a breadth of, varying perspectives from other fields. And part that could possibly be because, right now in the healthcare system, physicians are just so overburdened with patients, they don't have time to look through a lot of literature outside of the traditional, the heavy hitting papers within that field. And so maybe
Right.
it's not really bagging on them. It's how do we, to me, it gets back to the awareness. How do we, show the awareness to patients, struggling patients who are looking for that hope, looking for that opportunity or at least option to find something else that could possibly work for them.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be exposing it to more physicians in the field,
Right.
the so-called leaders in the totality of the field of medicine.
Something interesting on that. I think that from the standard medicine perspective, they see a bunch of cowboy functional neurologists, right, that are consistently just bagging on their industry and bagging on the healthcare system, and that can't feel good, right? So I think that there's at some point, actually, hopefully, that's what we'll be able to do with Brain Advocates is create a little more of a bridge, right, between people and help to let everyone know about the best treatments. But one of my wife's doctors, the neurologist that she was with, actually, when we met and started dating and then got married, I don't think she was even allowed to suggest treatments that weren't FDA approved by the rules inside her clinic. And I don't know if that's true. That's just my hunch, because as soon as we would find something that was effective or that worked, we'd ask her about it, and she'd say, "Oh yeah, I've had a few patients do that." And it was almost like a sigh of relief, like, "Oh, phew, they found it, but I didn't have to tell them about it." And like, that has to change. Like, I don't know how that's going to change, but I mean, maybe it's just this. Maybe it's educating people one-to-one instead of them having to go to doctors. But I'm really grateful for people like you and like Dr. Clark that are deeply ingrained in the medical community, that aren't just cowboys in the Wild West, bagging on the medical establishment, because it's people like you and Dr. Clark that can bring more legitimacy to these treatments.
Yeah, and then, that's honestly one of the bigger reasons too why I wanted to go to medical school is to help bring more credibility to what we're doing. And especially, with me getting a dual degree as an MD and PhD, there is, kind of a battle within the medical field itself between MDs and PhDs. And it's, one of the complaints that, from my understanding, that MDs have is that, the research that PhDs do is phenomenal, but there isn't clinical relevance to it. Or maybe there is some abstract clinical relevance, but it's not really applicable to the time constraints that they have, that MDs have. And then
it's like, sure, that could heal the brain if I could treat my patient for 30 hours every week. Like, sure, that could heal the brain.
Exactly. And then, from vice versa, it's the PhDs have a complaint against MDs where it's like, look at all this cutting edge research that we're doing. We need the support from the clinical establishment to help further possible effective treatments that can then become adopted as standard of care, which is really the law of MDs is to go by the standard of care. And so that's why I'm so blessed to have the opportunity to have a dual degree, or be training in a dual degree, so I can help bridge the gap between that as well. It also could be that really the medical establishment doesn't primarily focus in general on prevention, and that's a big thing as well, right? Like, in my opinion, probably one of the best ways to deal with the recovery of traumatic brain injury is prevent them in the first place.